Okay, guys, so this is going to be a close reading of an extract towards the end of Act 3, Scene 3, between Iago and Othello, that really is one of the most famous exchanges in the play, and that's absolutely filled with complex language and um, really complex character interactions that capture the manipulation of Othello really, really closely. So we're going to look at these first few lines first of all. Good name in man and woman, dear my lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. So we begin in this context with Iago attempting to unsettle Othello and encourage this sense of jealousy that he's managed to cultivate in him already. Um, Here is really where he turns the volume up on this passionate jealousy that he knows he can inspire in Othello. Now, one of the things that probably strikes you reading these lines is this opening contention, this metaphor of reputation, good name in man and woman, reputation, the way in which you're perceived by others. Dear my lord, and again, this very religious and moralistic invocation that he constantly uses together and simultaneously with abstractions like virtue and justice and duty and concepts of this nature. This good name is the immediate jewel of their souls. And this metaphor of reputation being like an immediate pressing jewel that's close to the body, it suggests obviously the value of reputation, but strikingly also it reverses the advice that he gives to Cassio, that reputation is a mere kind of trifle, in the same way that virtue is a mere trifle. This is again demonstrating Iago's manipulative ability to oscillate between that sense of cynical realism and a commitment to abstractions such as virtue and duty and hierarchy and rank, all of the things that Othello is so deeply invested in. Further to this, he says, who steals my purse steals trash. And there again is this idea that money itself is worthless. That money is worth nothing, but reputation is worth all of this value that we invest in cash. And again, this exclamation here, "'tis something, nothing," almost kind of paradoxical in its structure. It's both an entity and not, because it's not invested. Reputation, because money itself, is not invested with the abstract value that we channel into concepts like reputation and virtue. It was mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. Now, the interesting connotation of this line that borrows this sort of triplet clause structure, 'twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands, gives us this idea of the exchange of ownership that is fundamental to the use of money. But that exchange of ownership demeaning the value of whatever it is that he is talking about. Here, obviously, he is invoking money itself. Someone has possessed it, it's also been his, and it's been slave to thousands of people. And that suggestion of shared ownership, an absence of possession, demeans its value, and is also suggestive, I think, of the feelings that Iago is able to cultivate in Othello towards Desdemona. He is able to effectively get Othello to feel this way about Desdemona. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been a slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. So this builds this extended metaphor throughout this opening passage by Iago that equates reputation with monetary value. And here, the idea that reputation not enriches him, robbing someone of their reputation does not gain you anything in terms of money, unless, like Iago himself, the irony of this is that he has gained from this. He has, for example, ruined Cassio's reputation, and he sees and he sees the gain from that experience. So he's actually lying here, and that's the great irony. It not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. So the stealing of reputation, the destruction of it, improves the thief of this reputation. It improves their life in no way whatsoever. So whilst it impoverishes the sufferer, it gives nothing to the life of the thief. And that this extended metaphor constructs this equivalence of reputation being tantamount to a form of wealth. And we think of the monetary metaphors that proliferate throughout this play, of monetary metaphors being used to describe the way that Othello sees his position with Desdemona, and this is a constant way in which I think we are able to see where value is being channeled in a certain character. And here, this is so easily put on in this section by Iago, that he is able to convince Othello that he is channeling value into an abstraction like reputation, when in fact he absolutely isn't. We know that he has explicitly argued, the obverse of this. He's reversed this particular idea and argued the opposite of this at times throughout the play. Othello then says, "By heaven, I'll know thy thoughts." And Iago responds, "You cannot. If my heart were in your hand, nor shall not, whilst it is in my custody." So he's, playing coy here and saying, even if my heart was in your hand, you wouldn't know my thoughts. I'm going to keep them from you because I'm such a good friend and because I want to protect you from their suspicions. But again, there's a sort of slippery polyvalency and ambiguity about these lines, where actually this functions as a sort of revelation of truth. This line reveals the truth of his dissemblance, but it's passed off as a kind of authentic, friendly sensibility. That were my heart in your hand, you wouldn't be able to understand this. So his heart becomes this kind of metonym for his emotion and his feeling, which he manages to convince Othello that is channeled towards his best interests. But in fact, this is a sort of honest declaration, because Othello will not find out about the true nature of Iago's feelings until right at the end of the play. Othello then says, "Ha!" and a kind of exclamation of dissatisfaction, surprise, and I think shock, because he's starting to realize the implications of the suggestions that Iago is making. And then he goes on to this very famous set of lines describing jealousy. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. That cuckold lives in bliss, who certain of his fate loves not his wronger. But oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er, who dotes yet doubts, suspects yet fondly loves." So, beware, my lord, of jealousy is quite a dramatic segue in the dialogue here. This is quite a change of tack from what they've been talking about here. He's been trying to get the truth out of Iago, and then ever so suddenly he's warning Othello about jealousy, which obviously draws attention to the reasons why you would be jealous in the first place without actually evoking them. So it feeds Othello's suspicion that he would immediately segue into this topic of jealousy that he hasn't actually requested Iago to talk about. And then he describes jealousy as the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. And this really famous metaphor creates this, gives us the sense of the exact emotional state that he is cultivating in Othello. So not only does he actually cultivate this emotional state here, but this metaphor actually ends up sort of constructing the emotional state that it refers to. He creates the green-eyed monster which mocks the meat that it feeds on. By this phrase, mocking the meat that it feeds on, it gives us this suggestion of the sufferer being tormented by jealousy as a predator. It mocks what it kills and eats, and that actually jealousy, being a green-eyed monster, is destructive, self-destructive, and tormenting at the same time, and that here the sufferer is no more than the meat that it feeds on. So it becomes, again, this suggestion of loss of rank or degeneration, that you are somehow the meat for this predatory emotion. And that is exactly what Othello is paranoid about, and that is what he bewails in the rest of this, in other moments in the rest of this scene, whereby he equates the destruction of his relationship with Desdemona to the loss of his status and his military reputation. So here, I think Iago is aware of that potential for degeneration. He goes on and says, that cuckold lives in bliss, who's certain of his fate, loves not his wronger. So the idea here is that certainty is a form of bliss, that actually someone who is cuckolded, a man who has been cheated on by his wife, lives in blissful content when he understands the true nature of his, the way in which he has been abused and wronged, and that the certainty prevents him from loving the person who has done him wrong. So it prevents us from feeling anything for the person who has committed a kind of grave sin against us. But then he says, but oh, what damned minutes tells he over. But what tormented time. Time itself becomes a kind of some form of fallen or sinful state. They're damned minutes. When you are in the doubt of jealousy, when you're in that state of uncertainty. And he creates that sense of tension on a linguistic level here. He said, who dotes yet doubts. And in that plosive alliteration is that, and the assonance between the vowel sounds, is that suggestion of equivalence, of doting on someone and doubting their integrity, of attending to them in a way that shows your adoration for them and your love, and yet doubting their fidelity at the same time. Suspects yet fondly loves. There's, again, what we would see in both of these examples, these clauses here, this first one here and then this second one here, is an example of antithesis. Doting and doubting are words that echo each other on a level of sound, but actually they're antithetical in terms of their ideas, and yet suspect and fondly loves is also a series of antithetical ideas that captures that sense of ambiguous tension that the person experiencing jealousy would undergo. So what we have here are two clauses that mirror the grammatical structure of each other, with verbs either side of these conjunctions. Here, yet, the same one. And when you have clauses of sentences or sentences themselves that mirror each other's grammatical structure, it's called apposition. And this grammar, I think, suggests the illogical state of tension and its horrors, whilst actually creating it. So whilst this is the clever thing that Iago does with language, whilst describing the torment of an emotional state, the description itself is itself creating the emotional state that it describes. So it becomes a form of self-fulfilling linguistic prophecy. Another point to note here is this sort of alliterative shift between these plosives to the sibilant sounds in suspects. And I think that shift from a kind of forceful, punctuated sound that you make, with the front of your mouth, doting and doubting, to this sort of sinister, suggestive sound that you make when you say the word sibilant, and you've just heard me do it a lot of times, suspects, suggestive, sinister sound. That movement from dotes, doubts, suspects, I think, gives us a sense, a very strongly implied one, that we are moving from a sense of solid resolution to suspicion, that we are in some way moving in the narrative of this play and in Othello's state of mind, particularly in the direction of suspicion, in the direction of uncertainty and suspicion, from a sense of solidity and certainty.